Thanks for joining us this evening or this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you are. We're going to be talking about the UK and about the Fabian Society. You know, with Thunderous, I do a monthly series we call Is the UK Okay? Well, it is decidedly not okay. And we're going to look at why. What is the ultimate source behind the reason? Well, what is the ultimate source for the UK not being okay? Well, we're going to talk about the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society is, on the surface at least, respectable, deeply involved in politics. Every single Labour Prime Minister in history has been a Fabian. That includes Keir Starmer. And of course, these people are, well, they don't want to advertise it, they are socialists. Call it communists. They're a less radical form of Marxist in the sense that they're not revolutionary, they are evolutionary. They boil the frog slowly. It's the slow creep, the long march. And of course, there is the important question. Do they have nothing to do with Islam? And of course, the answer is they have nothing to do with Islam, which means yes, of course. But we'll get to that in due course, because somehow Mr. Aleister Crowley loved him some Muhammad, loved him some Islam. The world's greatest Satanist was steeped in Islam, and just maybe, tiny percentage that the Fabian Society is also deeply in love with Islam. But you never know. We'll find out. Thunderous, welcome back. Tell me your thoughts. How's the UK today, and what are your thoughts about what we're going to talk about today?
Hi guys, hi Lloyd, thank you for inviting me on the show again for our monthly topic. Just a slight different theme for this evening. You brought to my attention the Fabian Society, so let's take a deep dive and see why the UK is in the state that it is. Is there historical context to it, and just how far back does the history goes? And for those who are aware that have listened to me on Lloyd's channel for the few years that I've been on with Lloyd will know that I have a deep-seated hatred for Darwinian evolution and all things associated. And I'm going to mention my hatred again this evening because there seems to be a correlation between Lloyd's findings and my contempt for what I consider to be the vilest, most evil ideology to have ever been conceived.
Yeah, we're going to be talking about that today. So yeah, thanks. Hello, audience. Welcome. Good to see you all. I see we've got Sandro. We have David James Flood, Villainous. Good to see you. We've got Janice, of course. We've got the Triggered. Oh God, what is that full name? The Triggered Christian. Hello. Hope in Christ, Ave Maria, MA552, Michael Lawler. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Of course, if you do like what I do here, please do like, share, subscribe. It really helps. YouTube suppresses the channel, as you may or may not know. But really, talk about it, share it, use the material, use the ideas. And yeah, so let's just dive in. And we're going to start here. The UK and the Fabian Society. How the UK became a socialist state. But of course, besides being a socialist state, it's also being overrun by Islam. And the question could be, of course, are the two somehow connected? Is there a kindred spirit, a relationship, a connection, a historical link? Of course there is. Like, good grief. Like, why do we even ask? So let's continue. The Fabian Society, this is their second symbol here, not their first, their second. Okay, the wolf in sheep's clothing. What this means is you don't create new institutions, you infiltrate big already existing ones, and you subvert. And they were in your face. But we'll talk about that as we go. So let's start with a wonderful quote by Bertrand Russell in his 1951 book, The Impact of Science on Society, because science is good for you, right? Darwinism is science. Don't forget, Darwinism is science. We're going to learn a little bit about science and the people who want us to follow the science. We're going to learn a lot about that today. The Impact of Science on Society. The Nobel Prize-winning British mathematician, philosopher, and eugenicist, meaning he wants you dead, Bertrand Russell forecast a future where the elites would use science as a means to control the population. He wrote, diet, the food that you eat, injections, and injunctions, the law, will combine from a very early age to produce the sort of character and the sort of beliefs that the authorities consider desirable. And any serious criticism of the powers that be will become psychologically impossible. Even if all are miserable, all will believe themselves happy because the government will tell them that they are so. He then goes on in the Scientific Outlook, Russell writes, in the future, children's diets will not be left to the parents to decide. No, can't do that. But will be such as the best biochemists recommend. So, yeah, really forward thinking. Now, just so we know, he was a member of the Coefficients Dining Club of social reformers, people who had ideas of social reform in line with the stuff he just wrote up here. And this was set up in 1902 by the Fabian Society. The founders, the main founders, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. And of course, he briefly became a Fabian Society member. But a little bit more about that later. Thunderous, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think the first thing there is eugenics. People need to understand what eugenics actually means. You mentioned the word evolution a moment ago. That is in the evolutionary sense of Darwinian or whatever version is popular at the moment. But the point being, that was biological evolution, which got people from the hydro vents, or was it crystals, or was it the organic primordial soup, to where we are now, from fish to human beings, or frogs to princes. Eugenics is basically where human beings are basically saying, we now understand the science, we will now take over from biology, and we will control the outcome and destination for mankind ourselves by weeding out who we consider to be the undesirables of society, and improve mankind's lot by weeding out the feeble-minded, the blacks,
well, thieves. Yeah, we're going to learn the Fabian Society has that in mind, believe it or not.
Yeah, so we'll look into this, but I think people need to understand what the word eugenics means. Look at when it first came out. This is at the same sort of time as Darwinian evolution with Charles Darwin, at the same time as Charles Lyell, who wrote the geological column. And also the people that were born during that particular period of time that have since moved forward with it in its promotion.
Right. So moving on then. So the secret society that's been running Britain for 140 years. Now, this is a YouTube video called The Secret Society Running Britain for 140 Years. It is not the first one to cover this topic recently. There are a couple of others. So I'm sure that he's drawn on them, but I am going to use this guy's work as the basic framework. I'm going to paraphrase a lot of what he says, so I'm going to credit him right here, right? This is Josh Fawkes. His channel is called Green and Pleasant, right? And I recommend you watch his video. It's about 27 minutes long. It's really well worth watching. I'm going to cover the material that he goes through on his video, and I'm going to go into more depth and cover additional aspects of the topic. All right, so it's just that he's put out a very popular, very well written, very easy to understand video, very well presented, and there are many other videos at the moment. So prior to him, there seems to be a whole series of videos coming out suddenly about this particular Fabian Society. So this is the Fabian Society. And this is from their website. So many of the quotes that I will give are from their website or paraphrased from their website. It says here, we are affiliated to the Labour Party and work very closely with Labour politicians. They seem to like Labour a lot, as well as influencing debate across the political spectrum. Every Labour Prime Minister has been a Fabian. And today, hundreds of Labour politicians are members of their society, including Labour leader Keir Starmer, MP, and more than half of his cabinet. This is from their website, as well as senior figures in devolved and local government. In other words, they are the deep state entrenched everywhere. Our elected executive committee currently includes 5 Labour front benches. And that is true, Baba Ganoush. Nazis and Fabians were both pro-Islamic. It all seems brands and flavors of Gnostic socialists loved Islam. And yes, that would be true. So yeah, we're going to learn a lot. It's a really good channel, Green and Pleasant, really good channel. Yep. So credit to him. Understand that I came across this on his channel. There are other topics, other channels covering the same topic. So I recommend looking at them. They all have a slightly different view, and they add additional data. I've done my own research on the basis of what Josh Falks presented. So I'll be building on his. So yeah, so credit goes to him. All right.
Can I just comment, Lloyd? Just before we go any further, you've quite rightfully so brought attention to Josh Falks. I think it's only fair to say that when people are saying, well, go and watch this video, there can be a tendency of watching things blindly. But this gentleman, Josh Falks, which is one of the reasons why, Lloyd, you've taken it quite seriously, is that he is providing evidence as well. So it's not just opinion and statements through some kind of presupposition. In his own words, he has the receipt. So this is one of the reasons why Lloyd and myself are encouraging this video.
Yeah. And so let's continue. A socialist government. Now, this is from the Fabian. These are screenshots. Hard fought. Oh, and remember, the Fabian Society are the future of the left since 1884. In other words, the Fabian Society created, fosters, and steers the leftist movement. They are the political and social left. So hard fought. Labour have won in a landslide. Now, of course, it's the smallest landslide in UK political history, because something like 59% of the UK voted for this guy or something. So it's not like that's exactly a mandate. But it says here, Labour have won in a landslide. The task of changing Britain starts today. Changing Britain, writes Andrew Harrop. And of course, here they go with Mr. Keir Starmer on their cover. This guy just looks like a piece of wilted lettuce. I mean, the guy's got like all the oomph of a wilted lettuce. So, socialist government. So, a socialist organization has supplied every Labour prime minister in UK history. It has 141 MPs in Parliament and more than half the cabinet. Now, again, I'll be paraphrasing or quoting much of what Josh Falks uses. I used his script as a template. So we won't need leaked documents to prove it, because they'll tell you all of this themselves. It's literally printed on their website, and they are very proud of it. You may or may not have heard of the Fabian Society, but it's really time that you do. You need to know about these people. Now, much of what is out there about them is surface level or oversimplified, and of course, brain dead conspiracy theory. Right? I actually want to bring up something, because this is going to be important. This is actually going to be very relevant to the topic here, because this is basically the quality of thinking that most people seem to have on social media. You know, here they are doing their threat analysis, their unbiased threat analysis and objective thinking. And of course, they're coming up with, you can figure it out. Here's the threat and here's what they see. And that's pretty much the level of thinking on the left today, right? But maybe we need to look in a different place. Maybe we need to look for different threats. So let's unpack all of the verifiable, documented evidence. Now, we're going to provide direct quotes with names, dates, and page numbers from the Fabians' own publications, and you can go and verify all of this, again, for yourself. They're obviously not keen for you to look at the eugenics, what they call lethal chambers, the praise for Stalin, the praise for Hitler, which is all in their publications as well, right? What is eugenics? Eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. In other words, a bunch of technocrats, political leaders, social leaders will decide how you are going to manage society for the benefit of society. They're going to help you help yourself by, you know, making all the right decisions. They're going to help you make all the right decisions. And because you can't be trusted to make all the right decisions, you see. And they're going to uplift the quality of human stock by getting rid of the undesirables. Like a tree, eugenics draws its materials from many sources and gives them organic unity and purpose. And there's lots of things: genetics, psychology, anthropology, development studies. They've got all sorts of things: family stock study, applied eugenics, mate selection, population studies. In other words, these people have their fingers in everything. Thunderous?
Yeah, absolutely. It's one of the things I studied many years ago, particularly because of the literature that was coming out at the time of Darwin. And Darwin, Karl Marx, eugenics, Hitler, they're all very much closely tied. Eugenics seems, it's like Darwinian evolution, or whatever version of evolution, is the biological process. And then this comes into the equation, eugenics, and eugenics is what takes things over. This is what people are using, although the powers that be are using to move society forward. They are taking control of, for want of a better phrase, mankind's destiny themselves. They're, in effect, sitting in the seat of God.
Yes, correct. Now, of course, you may or may not have been told about the Richardson lethal chamber for the painless extinction of lower animal life. Well, of course, they say this will be used on things like dogs. You know, when Muslims take over the UK, they want to get rid of the dogs this way, I would guess. But let's just say that the eugenicists from the Fabian Society, the founding members, had ideas for people too. And these people could also benefit from painless extinction. So, yeah, so thank heavens, at least, guys, if you are found to be lacking when they interview you to see if you are a net contributor to society or you're a drain on society's resources, and you don't provide anything, they will at least provide you a painless extinction, a painless exit. I guess we'd call that, we have a process for that today. In Canada, they call it MAID. But we do have a process for people to euthanize themselves. They've implemented it in that sense, and it's painless. And if you are a drain on society, maybe you can make that choice yourself, you see. But if things get tough, they have a method for the painless extinction of lower life. And they may or may not consider you to be lower life. And then, of course, George Bernard Shaw. Yes, go on.
I was just going to say, when you talk about lower life, one really has to look at eugenics and see the pure racism that's contained in the literature as to who they see and constitute as lower life. I think, if I remember correctly, they refer to black people as barely human or animals because they consider them to be without conscience, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, but look, we'll stick to the topic more or less. So George Bernard Shaw, you may have heard of him. He loved himself some Stalin. He loved communist Russia. He loved what the USSR was doing. So he wrote these, very beautiful articles to praise and recommend and commend what was happening in the Soviet Union. But now you also have to know where to look for all of this, and hopefully I can collect it all together and give you a clear understanding of just how sick and depraved these people actually are, right? And one man did try to warn us about, oh, where did Thunderous go? So one man tried to warn us about all of this. Well, because his teacher at Eton was one of them. And by the way, if JC's around, JC, I emailed you the link if you want to jump in the studio. So his teacher at Eton, you may recognize this guy here. So his teacher at Eton was one of them. And this is why he wrote to try to warn us about Fabian Society. You may or may not know who he is, but we'll talk about him a lot. So, A Wolf in Sheep's Clothing. The Fabian Society is founded in 1884, and it's named after the Roman general Quintus Fabius. He's got a much longer name, but really doesn't matter. Quintus Fabius. That's where they get the name Fabian. So they chose a wolf dressed as a sheep for their coat of arms. They chose a wolf dressed as a sheep for their coat of arms, a literal wolf in sheep's clothing. Now, most organizations, of course, try to hide their deception. These guys were out in the open about it. They literally put it on their coat of arms, right? It's advertised on their logo. And their motto was written by a guy called Frank Podmore. And he was an influential member of the Society for Psychical Research. So the man is solid. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, it's worth mentioning that they were probably hidden in open sites because at that time, I think the number of people that were literate was probably fewer in comparison to the per capita of people and population that are literate today. And also, social media didn't exist. Newspapers had only just started in the United Kingdom. So I think they were able to do this openly because it would have been perceived as something aristocratic, or for those that are formally educated, it was material that belonged to them.
Right. Yeah. So JC, by the way, I've emailed you the link. Yeah, it's right in our faces. Yes, Janice, it's right in your faces. Okay, so the motto is written by Frank Podmore. He's a very influential member for the Society for Psychical Research. And you can see here mesmerism and Christian science. Christian science is not Christian. It is not science. And mesmerism, well, that's basically early forms of hypnotism and magical control of minds, blah, blah, blah. And mental healing, a short history of mental healing by Frank Podmore. So you can see this guy's legit right there. Now, psychical researcher Alan Gould wrote that he was compelled, he's talking about Frank Podmore, and this is going to be important actually, oddly enough, this is going to be very important. Alan Gould wrote that he was compelled to resign without pension from the post office because of alleged homosexual involvements. So Frank Podmore was kicked out of his job and he got no pension because, well, he was, homosexual. Fine and well. And researcher Ronald Pearsall wrote that it was very strange that his brother Claude, his wife, and no member of the Society for Psychical Research attended his funeral. Yes, he was a married man. His brother Claude was a minister for the Church of England, I believe, and when he got kicked out of his job, he got kicked out of his house, because when your wife finds out you're gay, she gets rid of you, right? She kicks you out of the house because what the heck, my husband's gay. What a shame. And then, of course, he went to stay with his brother, the vicar, and oddly enough, his brother didn't even go to his funeral. So apparently there's more than just being gay on the resume here. It might be a little bit worse than just being gay. There could be a lot more going on. But so this is the Fabian Society. The Fabian Society is Britain's oldest political think tank. Founded in 1884, the society has been at the forefront of developing political ideas and public policy on the left for 140 years. Any thoughts before I go on, Thunderous?
None at all.
Right. Now, in 1884, the particular specific day doesn't really matter. 9 people meet in a room above a shop on Osnaburg Street in North London. Among them, a children's author, a stockbroker, and a civil servant. So a wide variety of randos. All of them are not Jews, by the way. They were all part of the humanist group. Of course, humanists like to pretend that they are, the best of mankind, but it turns out many of them are just satanic and completely, shall we say, depraved. And they are part of a group called the Fellowship of the New Life. The Fellowship of the New Life. And this is founded by a Scottish non-Jew called Thomas Davidson. Right? The Fellowship of the New Life. And the fellowship's members advocating perfecting your character. The whole aim of the society was to have Thunderous, you just joined us a second time.
Sorry, I've just got a slight tech issue. Bear with me one moment.
Okay, no worries. So the whole aim of the society, the Fellowship of the New Life, is to perfect your character, to become a better person. And they advocate pacifism when they're not advocating killing people they don't like, vegetarianism, and simple living, and believing that pure intelligence, like atheists would, of course, would lead to a better and a higher society, including death chambers, recommending the Nazis as a great bunch of guys, Stalin as a great dude, and killing off people you don't like. So that's pure intelligence for the win. Members, of course, could attend both societies. Welcome, JC. Say hello.
Oh, okay. Interesting topic. I see that you are joining now dots that explain a little bit of what mess is going on in the UK.
Yeah, because the UK has been fascinating to me, man, and I've really been trying to figure out what the heck's going on.
Cool.
Yeah, but this is a very dark road. Okay, this stuff gets freaky. I mean, this is bad. I mean, yeah. Anyway, so let's continue. So members could attend both societies. So So you had the Fellowship of the New Life, and then these guys are all about making society better, making yourself a better person. We're gonna see exactly if they actually meet that goal or if they're just lying about it. But we'll see in a moment. And of course, they then say, hey, we don't just want to make ourselves better. We want to make society better. We need political power to do that. So then they create the Fabian Society. So when some members wanted to become politically active, they branched out the Fabian Society, and their political section was influenced, of course, by Karl Marx. Edward Carpenter, so Edward Carpenter comes along. He lived from 1844 to 1929. He's a founding member of the Fellowship, and he was at the first meeting in 1883, that's of the Fellowship of the New Life. He was also one of the founders of the Fabian Society and the Labour Party, and one of the most well-known people of this century, Edward Carpenter. Fantastic guy, wants to make himself a better person by perfecting his character. Nothing wrong with that. He was an English poet, a socialist philosopher, an anthologist, and an early gay rights activist. Just a gay rights activist. Nothing to see here. He was interested in the main ideas of the Fellowship, including politics and sexual radicalism, because that's what you do when you just want to make the world a better place and perfect your character. You promote sexual radicalism. Any thoughts, guys, before I go on?
This would be the birth, if you like, in my estimation, of sowing seeds to undermine the biblical objective moral values.
Of course. They want to gay all the things. Let's just put it bluntly. They're trying to gay all the things. JC, any thoughts before I move on to the next slide?
Yeah, I'm a little bit shocked, but yeah, it looks like, hey, you know what? We can make better rules, and the rule is a sort of free for all.
Yeah, it implies that God is the implication is God is restrictive. We can do a better job than God if we control society ourselves. We just don't need him. We can do it ourselves. Has anybody seen that written in Genesis chapter 3, verses 1 to 5? I seem to think that's happened sometime in history previously.
Yeah, we're going to learn all about these guys, because we're going to learn about these guys. This story is bizarre, okay? So let's learn about Havelock Ellis and the science of inversion, right? So the Fellowship, this is the Fellowship of the, whatever the heck they were called, the Fellowship of the New Life. So what does the Fellowship teach us? Well, they teach you why the gays and the trannies are better than you. Are you a gay or a tranny? Well, too damn bad, because the gays and the trannies are better than you. So this is Sexual Inversion by Havelock Ellis and John Addington Symonds, and this was published in 1897 in London. See, being gay is not a sin. It's biology. And in fact, it's not even biology. It's science. You see, it's science. It's not a hadith. It's not bullshit. It's not a fairy tale. It's science. It's hadith science. And being gay is sexual science. Let's learn all about it. The Fellowship of the New Life was a radical group that prioritized ethical living ethically, and personal liberation over pure economics. So this is Marxist morality. Marxism is really, in a real sense, a system of morality. It's not an economic system. It tries to impose a particular worldview, a particular religious view, shall I say, on the world. But personal liberation. Liberation from what? Well, those stifling Christian rules that were, keeping society down in the Victorian era, right? So he writes Sexual Inversion in 1897. It's co-authored by Ellis, and this was the first English medical text. It's a medical text. It's science. Trust the science. Remember to trust the science, to argue that homosexuality was born in, rather than a choice or a moral failing. You see, you're born that way. That's why you have to have surgery. Ellis coined the term inversion to replace the word sodomy, wanting to strip away the religious stigma and replace it with a scientific category, because it's science, you see. It's all very scientific. And here's your Vaseline. Then comes the Bedborough trial. I read about this. I decided not to go into much depth, but the books, there was an 1898 trial, right? And they took the publisher, and anyway, so they went to trial, and the trial was was really wild. It was popular, and of course, it popularized the whole narrative, and it blew up the whole thing. And so there was an 1898 trial for obscene libel, and this became a turning point. This now became entrenched in the public consciousness. So the book was banned, but the trial galvanized radicals to defend the right to discuss deviant sexuality as a matter of science. Because you see, being a tranny is not it's not a choice or a deviant. It's gender, and gender is scientific, and the science tells us that it's based on gender. You see, does this all sound familiar, guys? Is this an old argument we've heard somewhere before?
Well, what I'm thinking is, didn't the Prime Minister in the UK have a little bit of a scandal that seems to have gone away, where 3 male models set aflame places linked to him or something like this, and then everybody stopped talking about it? I wonder where that came from.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm going to leave reserve judgment because, I mean, I don't think there's anything specifically linking them to any sexual activities with them, but let's see what the evidence gives us. But yeah, apparently, but it's one of the guys that has like male model pictures, which were apparently suggestive. So yeah, but I'm not gonna. I looked at it and I didn't think there was enough to go on. Lloyd is unstoppable. Thank you very much, Ted Bird. Thank you for that donation, 20 Canadian dollars. Thank you very much. Here's your Vaseline. Right. So sexual deviance is scientific. Thunderous, any thoughts before I move on?
Just wondering when these people are going to report to the nearest rainbow.
Yeah, well, so Mr. Havelock Ellis believed that by removing the shame around homosexuality, society could better manage and categorize all human sexual behavior for the sake of social progress. You see, it's not sexual deviance. There is no sexual deviance. It's just a scientific category. Like when these people want your kids to remove their, on a surgeon's table, or when they want to, your 4-year-old, it's not sexual deviance. It's science. It's human science, which describes that humans have a wide, diverse range of approaches to sexuality, which are all valid. You see?
Wouldn't this be? Would you say? I don't know if you're aware of this. Is it Albert or Alfred Kinsey who did a lot of experimentation, sexual experimentation on preteens, and trying to see if even if toddlers could be sexually stimulated, and trying to. And
you got to look up John Money. Yeah, John Money. Look up John Money, and that's an incredible story. That's just shameful. But yeah. So yeah, and it's not like they're going to say pedophilia is normal and that they just maps. No, that'll never happen, Joel. That I can guarantee that's not going to happen ever. Sure. Yeah,
but you can see where the evolution line is coming into this, because the reason why that they're referred to them as maps is because what they're suggesting is if you take away objective theistic moral values, it comes down to pure materialism. So a person's inclination towards children, he can't help it. It is a biological conditioning or a failing on evolution that has made that person that way. So one has to be careful in particularly navigating the way that we discuss this.
Right, but we're going to learn a little bit more. Let's go to another slide or so on this. So let's talk about Edward Carpenter and the third sex, you see? Because as you know, there are 3 kinds of humans. There are men, women, and Canadians, right? So what they're saying is, no, it's men, women, and gay people. You see, that's the third sex. So homosexuality as a cultural vanguard. Now, what is a vanguard? A vanguard is a group of people that lead the way in new developments, new ideas. They're at the forefront of social development, at the forefront of developing ideas, at the forefront of discovery and implementation. These are the leaders in societies, the great thinkers, the great minds that take us forward out of the broken box, the darkness of the cave, and they lead us forward into the bright new future. That's the vanguard. Now, Carpenter, who founded the Labour Society, is involved with the Labour Society, the Labour Party. My apologies. Carpenter is a very key figure in the fellowship, and he argued that gay people were a third sex. You see, evolution produced 3 sexes. Men, women, and gay people. There's a third sex, gay people. That is why gay people need to actively solicit your kids to make them gay, because they were gay anyway. They just had to work really hard to get them to become that way. Any thoughts before I go on, guys?
Okay, if they're looking at this from a mere material point of view, my counter argument would be, if you're going to suggest that this is a third sex because you see it manifest within human beings, and the counter argument will be that you see it in nature between certain animals, one point would be you do not know why those animals are behaving in that way. It is certainly not in the context of having a homosexual relationship. It could even be a method within the animal species of trying to become an alpha male in that pod or batch or whatever.
Dominance. I mean, it could be dominance or deviance because of the lack of female.
But also, I would counter argue. But you also see cannibalism. You also see rape. You also see, what about human beings who are prone to bestiality? What about human beings who are prone to necrophilia? We have these words in the lexicon.
Yeah, and these are deviants. They try to normalize deviance because it's in nature.
Yeah, but the thing is, you see, cannibalism and rape actually are legitimately within, along with deception.
In Islam as well.
Yeah, which is interesting because deception is seen within nature, and that's exactly what the Fabian Society do. They deceive. But my counter argument to all of this would be, what about necrophilia and bestiality? If there is no objective moral value and there is no God, and we are a product of materialism, then what is the material view from these materialists when human beings are behaving in a very material way that is contrary to nature?
No, yeah, JC, your thoughts?
With this, I'm thinking about the letters of Paul. He describes who a leader must be, and is somebody beyond reprisal. And then he actually explains what that is. And when you explain these things about these sort of people who then become leaders, they are the least people you want to have any level of power. They just go against everything that Paul said that just rings true to anyone with any common sense. These people should never be allowed to be anywhere near a position of influence. They're lunatics.
Too late, but you're right. Very well said, both of you. So, gay people are a third sex. They're nature's third sex. Nature made them that way. That's why they've got to solicit your kids. Or earnings, as he calls them here, this word earnings. Now, an earning is a biologically distinct individual who combines male and female traits. You see, when you're both male and female, you are, I guess the word we would use is non-binary. I just made up a new word, non-binary. Never heard of it, but the Fabian Society founder and the Labour Party co-founder, he came up with this idea that there's a third sex called non-binary transgenders. Actually, hold on, he writes a book called The Intermediate Sex, and it says a study of some transitional types of men and women by Edward Carpenter. Oh my, what a new idea. Never heard of this stuff before. Have you guys heard of people that are trans between men and women? Have you guys ever heard of that? Is that science, guys?
The only trans I know are transgressors.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I've never heard of this stuff. This is totally new. It's not like can you think of a single time in the last 10 years that you've heard or seen any of this stuff? Trans people? Never heard of it.
That's the type of music that was popular in the 90s. Now, I used to go to a few nightclubs and there was plenty of trans there.
I would say that the way that you've described this, it reminds me immediately the conversations that you've had before about Baphomet. This is his description.
Yeah. So, so someone asked about the occult. Well, maybe we could start digging down that road of Baphomet and being hermaphrodite, being trans, having male and female characteristics, because that's what the Baphomet is. But so basically, maybe you want to thank the founders of the Fabian Society for trans, because without their new redefinition of science, maybe you wouldn't have that shit creeping out your kids. Moving on. So in his book, The Intermediate Sex, Carpenter argued that inverts, not perverts, inverts, were historically the creators of culture. People who Men who stoop other men up the ass are the creators of culture, the best among you. He cited the Greeks, which, as far as I know, is a completely false history about the Greeks. And the samurai, I think that's complete bogus nonsense too, to prove that these relationships were essential to civilization. So according to the founders of the Fabian Society, what is essential to civilization is to shag people up the ass.
You know what, Lloyd? That's actually quite interesting, because when you consider certain music genres that have become popular, homosexuality has been strongly linked to them. For instance, disco, early Chicago house music, the early Chicago house music movement, along with hip hop, they're all coming out now as having links to homosexual tendencies.
Of course, sagging is fagging, right? Sagging is fagging. JC.
I just remember this picture that was going everywhere, which is funny as well, by having Sadiq Khan next to him, who we all know what his beliefs must be about all of this. But there you have it. All very proud.
Yes, yeah. The Christian use of civil servant LGBT pride marches. Yeah. So yeah, let's just continue with all of this stuff. This is just freaky nonsense. So yeah, thanks guys for the really interesting comments. Very, very relevant comments in the chat. This is it's all very relevant. So let's continue. Carpenter lived in an open same-sex partnership at his farm, Millthorpe. And this served as what he called a living laboratory. You see, I'm not shagging a dude up the ass. This is a living laboratory to show the new life. You know, the fellowship of the new life. We are demonstrating the fellowship of the new life's ideals, proving that deviance from the heterosexual norm, the shackles of heterosexuality, is compatible with a productive and ethical life. But we're going to have to take your babies because somehow we don't have kids. We don't know why. Trans women are real women. So, moving on. He claimed that because gay people were not tied down, see, gay people are not restricted by traditional family structures. So, the gay people are thus naturally suited, the best at being teachers. You need more gay teachers. You need more gay healers, more doctors to cut off your winky and tell you you're a woman. And gay people are fantastically suited to be the social leaders of the new socialist era. You see, because if you want true peak civilization, you have to be socialist, and you really need the gays to lead it. So praise be to Allah for bringing us the transgenders and gaying all the things. Guys, does this sound like, this is fucking retarded. I can't believe that this is what is behind the Fabian Society, the people who have created every single Labour Prime Minister in fucking UK history.
This sort of stuff does strike me as odd and weird, and I'd never considered that this would have been part of the Fabian Society. I knew its links with, as I said, eugenics and the Darwinian movements and such, and the people that are surrounding the so-called intellectuals of that group of people. But this is all new to me.
Yeah, no, it's not in the other channels. Okay, I looked into all of this stuff. It's touched on briefly here and there, so I decided to do a little bit of digging. And I came up with the usual weirdness that I always seem to come up with. So yeah. So of course, Mr. Carpenter's work ensured that early British socialism, via the fellowship, they were trying to improve themselves to be the most perfect, the best person they could be, but through socialism, of course, can't forget that, was deeply tied to the idea that sexual liberation was just as important as economic reform. You not only need to equally distribute your wealth to everybody, but you also need to gay all the things, because the two go hand in hand. And if you're holding a woman's hand, please let go and go find another man and hold his hand if you're a man. And if you're a woman, let go of that man's hand, go hold another woman's hand, because there's no such thing as women. Trans women are women. And that goes hand in hand with economic reform. So Ellis and Carpenter brought the discussion of same-sex attraction out of the shadows and into the scientific field and into the progressive spotlight. It went from being fringe deviance to science and medicine, you see. And then it went from science and medicine to labor policy, to Labor Party policy. And then it went to HR and it became law. And now they'll arrest you if you don't like it. Guys, your thoughts before I go on?
I think this is a deliberate affront to Romans chapter 1, verses 26 and 27.
I mean, this is just, you know, Janice says this is new to her. Thank you for the very positive comments, guys. I see them. Thank you very much. I appreciate that you like the channel. Please share. Please tell people. You know. Yeah, go on.
I was going to say, Joel has put a comment in there. Joel T905, confusion and retardation of the highest order. I would just like Joel to comment on this. Say, is that in reference to Pastor Semper?
Don't know what that is. Not sure. No. Yeah, JC, any thoughts before I go on?
My thought would be that if these were things that basically they believed 140 years ago or 100 years ago, well, you know, a society can start in one way and then change, and that would be fine. But when we are seeing what is happening now, particularly with the UK, and now you are actually showing how these Labour politicians actually that they form part of this, there is that link there. Because they could have actually changed tracks, but seeing how they are acting nowadays, and they have for the past few decades, it looks like they never changed. This was the ideology from day one, and now they have finally succeeded to change society to make it a reality.
It's taken 140 years, yeah. They did it slowly, the long march through the institutions. For real.
Oh yeah, these things working generationally, don't they? They just keep pushing the envelope, as it were.
Yep.
Per generation, because they know that an outright revolution would not work, and there would be a historical reference points what that people look to. But this way, it's being done by stealth, and nobody would notice. And there seems to be a correlation with the dumbing down of society, almost like trying to remove any ability for people to become intellectually inclined or thinking. Therefore, creating a society where there'll be very little resistance.
Right. No, agreed. They don't want you to know and they don't want you to resist. Right. So who are the Fabian founders? Let's look at a few of them. So there are 9 founding members of the Fabian Society. They're all very much middle class. They're British and they're all rooted in Anglican, Quaker, or secular free-thinking traditions. You have Frank Podmore, author and psychical researcher, gay, the son of an Anglican priest. Edward Pease, a stockbroker turned socialist, raised in a prominent English Quaker family. Just don't forget that Mr. Crowley, Aleister Crowley, the world's most, well, the 20th century's most prominent Satanist, was raised in a, what was it? The Brethren of the something? Yeah. He's also raised in sort of a Quaker-style family. William Clark. Sorry, the Plymouth Brethren. He was raised in the Plymouth Brethren. Yeah. William Clark, a journalist, the son of an English shopkeeper, raised in a nonconformist Christian tradition. Hubert Bland, a bank clerk and journalist, raised in a middle-class English family, later converted to Catholicism. Edith Nesbit, an English author, famous for her children's books like The Railway Children, and the daughter of an agricultural chemist. Percival Chubb, clerk and educator, born in England and later heavily involved in the ethical culture movement. That's just more humanist nonsense. It became a religion. I've covered it on the channel in the past. Henry Hyde Champion, a journalist and former British Army officer born in India to a British Major General. Frederick Kettle, the Society's first secretary, English middle-class intellectual. Rosamund Dale Owen, an author and the granddaughter of Robert Owen, the famous Welsh utopian socialist. So even the heavy hitters who joined shortly after the founding, like George Bernard Shaw, was an Irish Protestant by birth, and Sidney Webb, born in London to a publican. And Beatrice Webb, the daughter of a wealthy English businessman, were not Jewish. Sorry, guys, sorry to disappoint, because if you have like holes in your teeth, plaque, caries, toothache, the Jews caused it somehow. They got into your teeth while you were sleeping, and then I know, but yeah, maybe it's just regular people can do bad things too. But on top of that, maybe there's something to do with Islam. We never know. Probably nothing, because nothing ever has anything to do with Islam. In fact, as you know, Islam has nothing to do with Islam. But let's go on. So the Labour Representation Committee was founded. This is the Labour Party plot from Caroon House, 14 Farringdon Street. The Labour Party was founded here in 1900. So the Labour Representation Committee was a pressure group founded in 1900 as an alliance of socialist organizations and trade unions. You see, the voice of the people, trade unions, right? How do you get everyone to follow the trade union? Aimed at increasing representation for labor interests in the Parliament of the United Kingdom. So all the socialists, all the crazy Marxists decide, let's fix up our image. Let's not be revolutionary. Let's be evolutionary. Let's form a political party. And so the Labour Party, of course, traces its origin to the LRC's foundation. So within 16 years, they helped found the Labour Representation Committee, which becomes the Labour Party. So the Fabians, the trade unions, the Independent Labour Party, they get involved with all of these work-based organizations, social organizations, into the industry. Of the original founding organizations, only the Fabian Society is still affiliated to Labour today in unchanged form 126 years later. This doesn't mean that the others haven't somehow remained linked. We'll talk about that. So the name tells us everything, because they named themselves after Quintus Fabius Maximus, a Roman general who beat Hannibal not by fighting him, but by exhausting him, harassing him, taking his time. And when he was ready, once he'd worn him down with the death of 1,000 cuts, then he attacked. He did it slowly. He did it patiently. He waited and waited and waited. And then he struck and he beat Hannibal. So the Fabian Society says the name derives its name from the Roman general Quintus Fabius, known for his strategy of delaying his attacks on the invading Carthaginians until the right moment. The name Fabian Society was explained in the first Fabian pamphlet, which carried the note, and this is from their website. For the right moment you must wait, as Fabius did most patiently when warring against Hannibal. Though many censured his delays, they criticized him for delaying. But when the time comes, you must strike hard, as Fabius did, or your waiting will be in vain and fruitless. If you guys want to jump in, let me know. But
We just mentioned about the Fabian strategy is exactly that, about not engaging until you have basically all of the numbers. So it's about just one move. But it reminds me of the saying from Islam, that is, the West have the clocks, but Islam has the time. So it's the same principle. They're not playing a very quick game, but a long game. They're running a marathon, not a sprint. And they seem to have that in common.
Correct. And, take advantage when you are uppermost, right? So their motto, this is their first logo, apparently. This is their first Fabian logo. When I strike hard. And you have a tortoise here. So their motto, for the right moment, you must wait. But when the time comes, you must strike hard. Now, they've had 3 logos over the years. First, the tortoise with the slogan, when I strike hard, meaning they are slow, they are patient, but they are violent when it counts. Now, their resolutions were written by Frederick Kettle, who was the first secretary of the Fabian Society. And part of their basis, part of their ideology, their beliefs, was to promote the transfer of land and capital to the state, because the state must control the means of production. You see, no private property. That is Marxist. That's 100% Marxist. The difference is they didn't take it through force. They're not revolutionary, they are evolutionary. Slowly and patiently, you will own nothing and you will be happy. Any thoughts, guys?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm good.
So many of the Fabians participated in the formation of England's Labour Party in 1900. The Labour Party constitution was written by Sidney Webb. And Sidney Webb here is the major founder of the Fabian Society. Interesting. So these crazy people wrote the major constitution of the Fabian Society. He also founded the London School of Economics, because after you've now got political power and political influence, well, now you need to get into education. You need to create a new generation of socialist economists, right? You need to make sure that young minds are being inculcated into your ideas. You're in the schools because you're in government. And of course, now you've got to take the intelligentsia and make them into people who think just like you. Don't forget, they call it the London School of Economics, but it's the London School of Economics and Political Science. That's on their logo. So it's politics, not just economics. And he aimed for social reform via gradualism, not revolutionary Marxism. So then their second logo is the wolf. Now, this is the Fabian Essays in Socialism from 1889. This was a very popular text, and they would put out these little books with all of their writings and speeches and everything they've done. So every now and again, they'd put out a little book like this with, with everything that they'd published, all of their fine thinking. So with the second logo, the wolf in sheep's clothing, they realized that the optics were dreadful. And they quietly dropped that around the turn of the 20th century. And the logo they use today is a plain red square. It's very clean, very modern. It says absolutely nothing. Right? Do notice here, though, that you've got this angel with claws. Notice the angel has claws. And notice it looks like an angel here, but it's more like a gorgon. And look here, it's like a demon with a tail, a lion's tail, and it has more claws here. You see, so this is, yeah, notice lots of naked people, boobies, and demonic, actually. This would seem to look very, modeled on theology, modeled on religion, modeled on Christian symbolism, but this is actually somewhat demonic if you look at the picture carefully. So their strategy was never a shadowy ethnic Jewish conspiracy. It's a very highly documented, open political strategy devised by British middle-class intellectuals. So they believed that instead of inciting violent Marxist revolutions in the streets, they could achieve socialism in the UK by putting on a suit, getting a job in the civil service, writing pamphlets, and slowly convincing the existing elite that all of their crazy ideas were just common sense. And the Muslims went, that's a great frickin' idea, because you may or may not know this, but in Iraq, the Ba'athist Society, the Ba'athist party that ran Iraq, the party that Saddam Hussein belonged to, well, the guy who founded the Ba'athist party, maybe go and have a look and see if he was deeply into Fabian ideas, see if he, took a few things away from the Fabian Society and applied them in Iraq. And of course, moving on, right? So their ideas are just common sense. All you've got to do is get into civil service, spread these ideas until they become the norm. These are normal. These are not deviant. These are not crazy. These are not strange. So socialism, the Fabian Society centenary, right? And it says here, Labour Party, Labour, and the socialism. Labour is a communist political front. Simple as that. So there are three logos. First, you had a threatening logo, then an honest logo, a wolf in sheep's clothing, and then a corporate bland logo, boring, dull. And that's their strategy. Silent, quiet, in the background, nobody sees anything, nobody questions, everyone just goes along. And of course, they published the Fabian Essays in Socialism in 1889. And who edited it? George Bernard Shaw, this guy. And this man was insane. Any thoughts before I go on?
The cover of that socialist magazine, if you look at it from a certain perspective, I don't know if this is deliberate or maybe I'm looking into things maybe a bit too deeply and seeing something that's not quite there. Could that be perceived as a crucifix with a man on a crucifix, the way that it's presented, with Fabian on one side being one side of the crucifix and essays on the other, the man in the middle, and then you got the tree trunk going from the bottom all the way to the top?
Oh, you're right, like a cross. Yeah, like a vertical, like a cross. Yeah, the symbolism is very religious. Look, they do steal Christian religious symbolism because they are creating a new religion. I mean, we'll get to that. But yes, that's a very good catch. That's a very good catch. That's a very good catch, yeah. And it says here privilege. And they're
And
crucifying the guy with privilege. Yeah. In fact, if this guy has been crucified, then this is the guy with privilege who's being crucified by labor. See,
and the
capital is
two
bad.
guys,
Yeah.
and the
Sorry?
two guys. I'm just thinking about. I don't want to read too much. I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but the two guys could also be like the two Roman centurions that were there when Jesus was dying.
Potentially, yeah. Look, the symbolism, you will see they use blatant Christian symbolism later. We'll get to that. Yeah. So, right. So from Marx to Muhammad. I see I messed up my thingy here. So, now, here's the thing. George Bernard Shaw. Now, he's one of the founder members, and of course, he was very famous, right? George Bernard Shaw, very famous author, very famous influencer of his day. Right? And of course, he writes, "I have always held the religion of Muhammad in high estimation because of its wonderful vitality." And that's exactly the same thing that Aleister Crowley said. Islam is virile, it's vital, it's alive, it's strong. Unlike that slave religion, Christianity. But yeah, so yeah. So George Bernard Shaw tells us he's always held the religion of Muhammad in high esteem. It is the only religion which appears to me to possess that assimilating capability to the changing phase of existence, which can make itself appeal to every age. You see, it's the Borg, it will assimilate you, and it belongs in every age. The world must doubtless attach high value to the predictions of men like me. Oh, fantastic. Thanks. That's very humble of you, George. I have prophesied about the faith of Muhammad, that it would be acceptable to the Europe of tomorrow as it is beginning to be acceptable to the Europe of today. So George Bernard Shaw loves himself some Islam, and he's saying, hey, we got to do some work here. We got to put in the effort to make Europe love and accept Islam. And they said this, like 130 years ago. And maybe, just maybe, these predictions of these are coming true today.
It's interesting. It's interesting to note, Lloyd, isn't it? We discussed this a couple of weeks ago that during this period of time, when you're looking at, say, people like an early Winston Churchill, certain presidents of America, the ones that were strongly ingrained into Christianity or the biblical narrative had very, very open negative comments to make about Muhammad. All of them, without exception. And yet those who want to challenge the biblical narrative seem to be naturally drawn towards Islam in the positive sense. Can anybody see a pattern emerging yet?
JC, your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a little bit shocked by this. I mean, for me, I thought that this whole thing about people really loving Islam happened very recently as part of this project of basically trying to get Islam everywhere before it really collapsed. But if this was almost an ancient thing, everybody who had the this is actually as the definition of Antichrist is we don't like Christ, so let's actually go with who is the greatest enemy. Oh, those guys. Okay, so those guys are now the good guys. But this is not a prediction. This is not a prophecy. It is done by design. If they have spent 100 years trying to accomplish this, they've succeeded.
It's interesting. I think that's a really interesting point that JC has raised there, and I think it was something that we've touched on in the past. The two greatest enemies that the Bible has, or the biblical narrative has, is atheism on one side and Islam on the other, and both of them are using a pincer attack on the biblical narrative. I never saw it as a unified attack. I always thought it was like two separate attacks. But thank you, JC. Yeah, I can see it now that both of them are actually working together. And also, Lloyd, maybe you can correct me on this. Did George Bernard Shaw take the Shahada if he loved Islam as much as he does?
I don't know. I don't think so. But I mean, they wouldn't necessarily advertise it because the policy, we'll get into more of that, but the whole plan is they don't necessarily want you to be a member or to be directly associated. In fact, they will state they actually prefer that you don't. They would rather that you are sympathetic and that you carry out the plans of the group, but don't draw attention to yourself as a member where people can go, oh, you are biased. So they prefer to have influence rather than direct affiliation. So yeah, so you bear that in mind. Their fingerprints will be everywhere, but they don't want to have their footprints everywhere. So he goes on, the medieval ecclesiastics, either through ignorance or bigotry, painted Mohammedanism in the darkest colors. So the Christians just didn't understand Muhammad. He was just a misunderstood artist. They were in fact trained both to hate the man Muhammad and his religion. To them, Muhammad was Antichrist. So Joel, I saw you saying Islam is Antichrist, and that's just according to George Bernard Shaw. No, you're wrong. I have studied Muhammad, the wonderful man, and in my opinion, far from being Antichrist, he must be called the savior of humanity. And George Bernard Shaw can't be wrong. Muhammad is the savior of humanity. I believe that if a man like him were to assume the dictatorship of the modern world, he would succeed in solving its problems in a way that would bring it the much needed peace and happiness. But to proceed, it was in the 19th century that honest thinkers like Carlyle, Goethe, and Gibbon perceived intrinsic worth in the religion of Muhammad, and thus there was some change for the better in the European attitude towards Islam. But the Europe of the present century is far advanced. It is beginning to be enamored of the creed of Muhammad. And that is from the All Malaya Muslim Missionary Society, Genuine Islam, January number of Volume 1, 1936. George Bernard Shaw with Sufi Sheikh, the fucking Sufis in everything, including Crowley. The Sufis are everywhere. Sufi Sheikh, His Eminence Maulana Muhammad Abdul Salim Siddiqui. And that's GB Shaw on socialism. There's plenty of references to this. This is a legitimate quote from George Bernard Shaw. We're going to make Europe love Islam. We need more Islam in Europe. And then, of course, you discover later on that on this very religious symbolism, on this, let's just say that the Fabian Society has another motto. And where do they get it from? A Muslim. But we'll get there. Any thoughts, guys?
No, I'm good.
Yeah, I'm fine, dude.
So, The Inevitability of Gradualness, and this is the Fabians by Norman and Jean Mackenzie. So they're writing a history of these guys. A good man fallen among the Fabians was Lenin's patronizing characterization of George Bernard Shaw. Because, of course, Lenin was a revolutionary, and these guys were evolutionary. And you can see here fraternity, equality, and liberty. Let me see, hold on. The French Revolution had similar, good grief, liberty, equality, fraternity. That's in the French Revolution. That's the Fabian Society. Yeah, and the French revolutionaries were all very much socialists. That was a socialist atheist revolution. And it was genocidal in the extreme. Some of it to put Hitler to shame, in terms of how they murdered people. But anyway, so the essays on socialism sold out instantly. Within 2 years, there were 27,000 copies, a lot for the time, floating around. Before the First World War, 46,000. It was translated into multiple European languages, of course, including German, of course. The argument was very simple. Socialism was not a revolution. No. Those Marxists and Leninists are wrong. It's evolution. It's moving towards the perfect pinnacle of social development. Sidney Webb coined the phrase, the inevitability of gradualness, because you boil the frog slowly. In 1912, they committed themselves to the fledgling Labour Party and to social democracy. In Sidney's phrase, what they called inevitable gradualness. Hope in Christ says, Lloyd, you're making me question my whole life. We have been fed with all these lies for so many years. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy once you look into what these people actually say. Yeah, so for the next 20 years, they worked to grow the Labour Party's capacity to where the party emerged as one of the two main parties after World War II. And on 2 occasions, they formed minority governments. And then they created the New Statesman, a weekly political magazine that is founded by the 2 main founders of the Fabian Society. The New Statesman is still around today, still influencing people. for the worse, of course. And of course, they get support from George Bernard Shaw, and this magazine becomes a voice for Fabian ideas. And the New Statesman, you can see that looks very, very normal. Okay, and you've got here, Labour looks at strategy as well as tactics in face of green threat. Syria and Lebanon, forgotten victims. Labour is divided. How can green councils avoid austerity? The secure blah, Kanye West, blah, blah, blah. Reviewing politics and culture since 1913, the New Statesman. And of course, yeah. So there you go. That's the New Statesman. That's the magazine. This is the most popular magazine amongst government employees in the UK, of course. This is the premier magazine which influences Whitehall. Anything before I go on, guys?
Yeah, on that comment when that you read, this is making me question everything that I know. This is the thing, that you're actually showing a lot of stuff that it looks like there were villains in our history that we have been told they were the saints, they were the heroes, they were amazing. And when we just dig a little bit, we see they were absolutely awful. So the amount of propaganda that has been done historically is insane. I think something that needs to happen in the coming years is just going through every single person of history and really see who they really were, because it looks like we have just been fed propaganda about everybody, and the ones that we have been told they were amazing, they were actually quite awful.
Disgusting. Disgusting. I vote we start with Martin Luther.
Well, we have to start somewhere. We're actually doing a lot of Mohammed. Mohammed now, every Muslim will say, greatest man that has ever existed. We have the sources. Every Christian apologist is talking about that. So, well, yeah, the game has started with Mohammed. I think Luther might be number 2.
Is there a parallel with the Fabian Society, Lloyd, in, say, other countries simultaneously? Because it all happens after Darwin. Have you seen or any parallels taking place in, say, France, Germany, America, Australia? Is there a link that's taking place in secular lands that you've seen?
I mean, I haven't checked, but I would assume that these ideas were part of the intelligentsia. I mean, the ideas infect the universities, and they become part of the ruling elite within the military, within education, within government, and they permeate society, even science. I mean, if you look at the Germans, you look at the English, you look at the French, they all had the same ideas, eugenics, right? Even America, at the same time, all of these ideas became very popular. So yeah, they infect the elite, the elite intellectuals, and then they spread simultaneously. Yep.
Maybe you need to check in case that in France they have the equivalent of the Fabian Society. It's like Le Fabian Society.
There are multiple Fabian societies. There's the New Zealand Fabian Society. There's the Australian Fabian Society. There's different ones, like in Singapore. There's a bunch of them all over the place, but they're not all called Fabian societies. Some of them will be called the Willie Smith Society or the Jimmy Shopping Cart Society or whatever. I mean, they'll have different names, but there are multiple of these all over the world. So, yeah, there's lots of these all over the world. Yes, they are very strong in the Australian Labour movement. Exactly. There's the Australian Labour Fabian Society. They're all over the place. These guys are everywhere. So now let's talk about this guy, okay? George Bernard Shaw. This is not him. The stained glass window and the London School of Economics. So the Fabian window, we'll look at this more closely. We'll do this bit for today. The Fabian window is a stained glass window depicting the founders of the Fabian Society and their mission. And you can go to the London School of Economics blog, and they will happily talk about it. This is the London School of Economics blog. That's their website, London School of Economics and Political Science. And you'll see they've got this famous guy here. I'm not sure who he is, Mr. Bean or something. And they'll have all of this stuff, and they'll have George Bernard Shaw and Fabian Society member, and yeah, they'll talk all about this, blah, 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 blah. They'll talk a lot about this, the Fabian window, very famous. Okay, now this is very interesting. So we want to look at this. Like, let's start here. Well, there's a lot to be said about this. We'll cover some of it now, some of it later. The Fabian window was unveiled by the Right Honourable Tony Blair, MP, on 20th of April, 2006, in the presence of Howard Davies, director of the LSE, and the Webb Memorial trustees. It was commissioned by George Bernard Shaw in 1910 and depicts Shaw, Webb, Wells, Pease, and other Fabians. Fantastic. And there's Tony Blair smiling. I'm in the Triggered Society. How do I join? Yeah. I'm in the society that's trying to cope with stuff. I'm in the society of people that hate their jobs and are just utterly disgusted by this stuff. We meet on Friday evenings at the bar. I'll see you there. So, using Christian style imagery, yes, and we'll have to look at this. So, this is a holy work. You must understand the Fabian Society are doing holy work. Now, this caption here, this is the window. We'll talk at length about this holy work. George Bernard Shaw in stained glass, a remarkable window containing portraits of Messrs. George Bernard Shaw, Sidney Webb, Edward Pease, and other prominent Fabians. This very interesting stained glass window, the work of Miss Caroline Townsend, has been presented to Mr. George Bernard Shaw. GBS himself is seen assisting Mr. Sidney Webb to hammer the world into shape. You see, they're going to, we'll see more of this as we go, but here they are hammering the world into shape. We'll see it in color in a bit. Oops. Right? And Mr. Edward Pease, secretary of the Fabian Society, is blowing the bellows below them. Right? And below are a number of Fabians kneeling and praying in front of Fabian books. You see, they are kneeling and praying to books written by Fabians, because this is not a religious movement at all. It's not a theocracy. Definitely not. Any thoughts, guys, before I go on?
And this is Islam as well, like trying to get the world to follow basically the caliph. But these are the sort of people that you think, look, you guys don't touch anything. Whatever you touch, you're going to break. When they tell you, don't worry, I've got this, that's when you really start to worry. These people should not try to mold the world in any possible way, as they have proven.
It's interesting to note that they're doing exactly the same thing as what Muslims do with the Quran, in the fact that they worship a book. You know, so one question, Lloyd, rather than a painting, why do you think they went for the stained glass window? Is that, would you think, in your estimation, that is a direct sort of like
they see themselves in a religious fashion? I mean, we'll talk more about that. We'll get more to this. Let me go back here. Okay, let me do this in color just for a little bit. We'll come back to this window because there's a lot to be said here. But notice these guys are praying. They're legitimately praying here. They are this is an attitude of prayer. This guy's playing the bellows here, right? And they are taking a hammer and tongs, or hammer and hammer. They're hammering the world. They're melting the world. See, the world is hot and red, and they are hammering the world into shape. And look what's in front of the world. A wolf in sheep's clothing. And then before you'll notice here, there's a quote here, and there's a quote here, right? This is the primary quote on the stained glass window. So these are things to bear in mind. We'll come back to these. Yeah, moving on. Anything else?
No.
When they were praying to whom?
To themselves, to their own works, because they are the people they've been waiting for, which is exactly a quote that apparently Obama said. We are the people that we've been waiting for.
For people that don't have a God, they're extremely religious.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's actually what Sandros said before about the Tower of Babel. So it's exactly the same thing.
Yep. Yeah. Janice, remember your friend from the what's it, the Peasant Patriot or something? I tried to find an email for the guy, couldn't find one. I thought I'd invite him on to have a chat. But I know you are on the channel with him. Reach out to him, ask him to reach out to me, and let's maybe get him on for a chat at some point. Okay, so more on all that later. Let's change gears for a moment. Let's move to talk about Aldous Huxley and Eric Blair. Right? So we'll come back to the stained glass window. In 1917, a young teacher called Aldous Huxley taught French at Eton for about a year. Right? Aldous Huxley wrote the book Brave New World, and this is Aldous Huxley here. Now, he was nearly blind. He couldn't keep order in a classroom. Students played cards at the back, but he was very brilliant with language. And one of his pupils was a boy called Eric Blair. You may know Eric Blair. He wrote a book called 1984 under the pen name George Orwell. We've all seen this guy before. And of course, this guy was a member of the Fabian Society. And Mr. Blair here decided, this is really bad. I need to write about this and warn people. Anything before I go on?
Not for me. I'm good.
Yeah, working class patriot. That's the one. Yeah, let him know if you want. Let me know if he wants to. Tell him I'll be happy to invite him on, and we can have a chat and talk about stuff, and and so on. So you know him as George Orwell, author of 1984. Now Huxley's brother Julian would go on to become the first director of UNESCO, as well as the president of the British Eugenics Society, and the man who coined the word transhumanism, more of that tranny stuff, in 1957. Transhumanism is an intellectual and scientific movement that advocates for the use of advanced technologies like genetic engineering, AI, and nanotechnology to enhance human physical, cognitive, and sensory capacities. It tries to overcome limitations like disease, aging, and mortality, ultimately aiming to transition humanity into a superior post-human state. Now, Aldous would write Brave New World, drawing directly on the eugenic ideas circulating in these particular intellectual circles. So now you had 9 people in a room in 1884, and within a few years, they founded the London School of Economics, started a major political magazine, the most influential political magazine of its day, and they wrote the Labour Party's constitution, and now they run half of the Labour Party's members are basically from their society. And they use a strategy called permeation, right? So this is how a small group shaped an entire country, took over the UK. They call it permeation. You don't build your own institutions. You infiltrate the ones that already exist. You infiltrate political parties, universities, civil service, media, think tanks, you name it, schools, churches, all of it, just like the Muslims are doing today. You convert key people. You don't try to convert the masses, you convert key people. Now, you don't have to, now, of course, within Islam, they would literally convert you to Islam, but you would not necessarily declare your conversion, right? You keep your name, right? But you don't necessarily have to, when we say convert key people, you influence them, you make them sympathetic. Like a lot of white liberals in the UK and the US aren't Muslims, but they will act just exactly like Hamas in the defense of free Palestine. They don't have to be Muslims to be retarded. They will simply do the bidding because they think it's for a good cause. Now, Margaret Cole, Fabian historian, says it was not necessary that these key persons should be members of the Fabian Society. Often it was as well that they should not be members. What was essential was that they should at first, or even at second hand, indirectly, so you can't directly tie them to the Fabian Society, be instructed and advised by Fabians. See, so the Fabians could teach a lecturer, right? He then goes to the London School of Economics. He then teaches an economic student, and that student goes and works for the government or for another company, and he then sets policy to others who are themselves now getting, this is now 4th or 5th hand removed, they are now getting policy set by a Fabian. So this is 5, 6 levels removed. So you don't see the Fabian hand directly, but these people are directly influenced in a chain of succession from the Fabians, or chain of influence. So you slowly persuade everyone until your ideas become common sense. It's fucking retarded, but it's common sense. Any thoughts, guys, before I go on?
Yeah, everything that you've described so far, this is verbatim the Muslim Brotherhood memorandum that got famous years ago. Everything that you have said, like the whole action plan. So I do wonder if they simply copied from these guys.
Yes, very likely. The Baath Party, like these guys influenced the Arabs. They literally, we'll talk more about that. We'll get into them in Islam, but they were very influential in Arabia.
just to comment as well on what your previous slide, Lloyd, where it talks about the integration of technology with human beings, transhumanism. It's interesting to know. I think it was this year, or was it last year at WEF? They were talking about earbuds that you could put in your hair that actually have receptors on them, so that they can monitor your brain waves. Now, it was said in the context of that if you're watching, say, a political broadcast, they can watch the context of your emotional reaction to the political broadcast. They can also monitor if you're actually paying attention or if you're being distracted. So it's very much interesting that when you consider I've got the book, I haven't got around to read it yet, about transhumanism, that these things, those sound bizarre as far as people are, the average person is concerned, but these things are openly spoken of within WEF meetings and such, and these are available to see on YouTube, where you're actually listening to people talk about these things.
Right. Now, obviously, look, I mean, who knows? These people are just, they will do anything. They will cheat and lie and do anything. So, yeah, we just have to, but hopefully the more that we expose this, the more you show that the roots of these organizations are steeped in evil, anti-human, anti-life evil, right? Eugenics is horrific. I mean, it led to genocide. Darwin's family was deep into that, and Darwin was openly talking about genocide. Today, they might, shall we say, whitewash it, but it led to lethal acts by whole nations that are horrific. Murder on mass scale that has never been seen in history. And, so we've got to understand where these people come from. This is evil. It's just beyond imagination.
Yeah, can I just mention a name, if I may, for anybody that's listening? When I'm talking about these earbuds and technology as it is today and what they want to do moving forward, the name I would like people to look up is Yuval Noah Harari. So this is a guy. But this is part of the movement, though. I'm sure you'll agree. This is
read anything by that guy, you need to take a shower afterwards, because that guy's just dirty.
But he's part of these people here that we're talking about.
I'll just bring him up quickly. Just so everyone has his name. I reinstalled my computer today because I keep having to do that because Windows 11 is crap. Yuval Noah Harari. Yeah, he's a big, transhumanist and all of that. I mean, this guy's just disgusting. The stuff that he writes, the stuff he promotes is just awful. Okay, so Catherine and Eva Maria, I'm not Catholic, but I do take exception to the misconceptions, to the propaganda against the Catholic Church. Now, I try to be very fair and I try to be very accurate, but I believe that based on all the history presented in the past, that about 99% of the propaganda presented by Protestants and the common narrative against the Catholic Church is just bullshit. It's about 99% complete bullshit. Now, everything is exaggerated, everything is distorted, everything is misrepresented. That's just the common thing, right? And already there's, shall we say, misrepresentation in here, and I do not want to get into that conversation right now, but already I would say that what I'm reading here is misrepresentation already, right? There's a great number of issues, and I prefer you don't have this conversation in the chat, because it's also very easy for people to take potshots at a monolith like the Catholic Church, but when you look at the 48 billion buzzing swarm of the Protestant denominations, at least half of which are Gnostic these days and not even remotely Christian, highly subjective. And when you look at their founding ideologies, their founders, their history, it is filthy, right? You look at the Reformation, you look at the Reformers, that history is disgusting. And this is why I've invited dozens and dozens of Protestants. I've invited various people from Church of England. I've invited Baptists. I've invited various people from whatever groups to have those discussions with me, answer very specific questions, and I've had nothing but refusals, silence, and rejection, because they know that when they start going to the history as I presented it, it would humiliate them, it would embarrass them, and it would prove that the Protestants have lied for 500 years, not made small mistakes, openly and blatantly lied. They are liars. Their founders are liars. So, yeah, but it's just like Islam, it's easier to attack Christianity than defend Islam. It's easier to talk lies and spread lies told by the liars that are the reformers about the Catholic Church than to defend the ugly, disgusting actions of the reformers and the history and the founding of the Reformation ideology, which claims to be Christian. So, yeah, let's not have that discussion. And I do not want to see that discussion happening in the channel, in the chat right now. The triggered Christian, that's why I'm non-denomination. That would make you part of the problem. That would make you a victim as well, but it also makes you part of the problem. So let me see. So let's continue. Let's go on. Okay, so let's go on. So permeation, what is it? It is basically the slow drip of ideas, the boiling the frog slowly. So the real world examples, 1992, right? There's a Fabian pamphlet written by Ed Balls, right? He's still around today, and he calls for the Bank of England to be independent. Gordon Brown reads it, and he hires Balls as an advisor. 5 days after Labour wins the government in 1997, Brown then announces the policy as law. Result, one 20-page pamphlet becomes permanent economic policy in less than 5 years. Now, of course, you also hire people from the Fabian Society because personnel is policy. Remember, personnel is policy. If you're hiring a bunch of Muslims, then whatever they believe becomes policy. Right, so I'm going to address this briefly. I just follow Christ. That's what every heretic in history has said. And of course, when you go through the Protestant denominations, none of them can agree what Christ said. All of them follow the Bible. Yes, they mean that the Bible is an actual, real, objective, physical book. It's historical. What it says after 500 years, they have no idea. They disagree. Does baptism bring salvation? Yes. Does baptism bring salvation? No. You can find both. Now, the Bible doesn't teach contradiction. The Holy Spirit leads us into all truth. That's why Arminius and Calvin, they still can't agree after 500 years. There's literal contradiction. So either the Holy Spirit has been teaching contradiction to multiple thousands of denominations, deliberately causing confusion, or Protestants are smelling their own farts and making up bullshit. So one of these is true. Either the Holy Spirit is schizophrenic and teaching contradiction, or people are just making shit up. Now, we know the answer is B. Yeah,
Lloyd, just read 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10. That's enough.
What does that say? Tell me.
That you should all be fitly united in the same mind and in the same line of thought. Simple as that. Christ followers wouldn't be in contradictions or arguing over things.
Yeah, well, the problem is there is contradiction and it cannot be resolved because everyone says, but I follow the Bible and the Holy Spirit. But of course, everyone disagrees. So there's a problem.
So do Mormons. So do Mormons. Look at them. Anyway, moving on. I've got to leave. I've got to leave.
Move on. Yeah, let's leave it. So guys, let's go another few minutes and let's finish this slide and the next and we'll call it a day. So 5 days after Labour wins, boom. So that is permeation. Now, permeation is slow and steady wins the race. So we'll finish this slide and call it a day for today. George Bernard Shaw's the Fabian member from 1884. He's the Nobel Prize winner, and he co-founds the IOC, and he writes in 1892, we permeated the party organizations and pulled all the wires we could lay our hands on with utmost adroitness and energy. So they were politically active, trying to get as much manipulation going as they could. Permeation is manipulation. It's a direct quote from their own published tract, and he's boasting, we pulled the strings. In 1908, Shaw went further. He wrote that the Fabians had set two tasks. First, provide a parliamentary program for a prime minister converted to socialism. Maybe the Muslims have a task. Find a prime minister converted to Islam. But the Fabians have had their prime ministers converted to socialism, and second, to make it as easy and a matter of course for the ordinary, respectable Englishman to be a socialist. As easy to be a socialist as to be a liberal or a conservative. So they wanted to make socialism respectable. So, yeah. All right. So, any comments before I go on? I'll just leave it at that. I mean, we can end here, yeah?
Yeah. So, if you said at the beginning that every single prime minister that from the Labour Party, they were from the Fabian Society, then if you want a shot at being prime minister, you really have to be part of that society. Otherwise, you're not going to make it, right? So it looks like they have that bottleneck, like they control one of the two only parties in the UK, although that might actually change in the near future, right? That's your way to power. You have to be part of that group, else you're not getting in.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, no, eventually you don't, exactly. If you don't follow their beliefs, then of course you are excluded because they're not interested in ideas outside of their own. And at the moment, I mean, being a patriot, for instance, can get you arrested in the UK. You know, that's just a problem. I want to mention, so let me skip this. I'll skip ahead. These guys were extremely influential because there's a lot to cover here. But yeah, okay. Now, once we get to George Bernard Shaw, right, besides his love of Islam, besides the fact that he really thinks Islam is amazing, right, he writes and says, there's actually a fantastic video of his where he speaks about what he wants is, he wants people to, every 5 to 7 years, be brought before a panel. And they will be asked, how have you contributed to society? How have you given back more than you take from society? And if you cannot answer that question, then you should be sent to the lethal chamber because you are not worthy of life. And this is a policy that he openly spoke about, publicly spoke about. He said so. He actually made there's a famous little short video of his saying so. So yeah, so these are the kinds of things we're going to learn about, but these people are the bottom of the pit, the depraved of the depraved, from all sorts of sexual deviance to all sorts of manipulation, coercion, and so on. Yeah, I'll leave it at that. Shall we shall we call it a day here and then we carry this on in a week or so? Any other words from you guys?
No, my eyes have been opened in certain areas on this, Lloyd. I thought I knew a few things because it's something that I followed for a time, but thank you for bringing it to my attention because there's a few things I weren't aware of. So yeah, looking forward to continuing this discussion perhaps next week.
Yeah. JC, from you, any thoughts?
For me, I didn't know any of this. It's really shocking, but it's also starting to make sense what is happening in the UK once we're going a little bit into the history of who is running the country. So yeah, well done. I look forward to further exploration and seeing the links with Islam as well.
Yeah, that is going to get very interesting because there's a lot to cover. These guys have had more than a century to do their thing. They were heavily influential worldwide. So these guys have their tentacles worldwide. So yeah. So guys, I do say things here that are controversial. I do say things that are contentious. And I do want to start making a series again on the Reformers, the Reformation. The Reformation was not a religious movement. It was a political movement. It was heavily influenced by Islam. If you think it's bad that the Fabian Society was heavily influenced by Islam, and we'll get into that, you're going to be very unhappy with the fact that most of what you've learned about the Reformation is completely false as we get into the actual writings of the Reformers. This is why I cannot get any of these influencers online to sit down and talk with me about the founding of their particular denominations and their founders and the writings in their books because it's embarrassing to them. But once we look into the Islamic roots of many of their beliefs, we'll discover that, yeah, it's kind of fake Christianity. A lot of it's derived from Islam, and it's going to be very uncomfortable to deal with that fact. It's easier to lie about the Catholic Church and lie about history than look at what did the founders of the Reformation movements really believe, and where did they get those ideas? And you might discover the same place the Fabians did. So we shall talk about that. And yeah, guys, so we'll be back probably tomorrow with JC, right? We're going to do monotheism tomorrow, right?
Yay, yay. Yes.
Yeah, we're going
Look
to talk
forward
about
to it.
Thomas Malthus as well. We're definitely going to talk about Thomas Malthus. We're going to get into that. These people were Malthusians. These people were retarded, whatever bad ideas that went into it. So, guys, yeah, I'll call it a night here.
Good. God bless you all. Take care.
God
Thank
bless
you,
you all. Good
everybody.
night. Bye.